Let's start with Golden State, which is still clinging to this fading dynasty that they have up in the Bay Area. Golden State still with Steph Curry, still with Draymond Green. Klay Thompson walks to Dallas after last season. I watched bits of the first exhibition game. Great finish to that game. Not a great start for the starting lineup that the Warriors rolled out there on the floor. I'm trying to get to a place, Sam, where I can envision this team going beyond the 46 wins they had last year. But I'm struggling. I do think that DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, some of the guys they signed in the offseason are good offsets for Klay Thompson. Yeah, I think you can count on some natural progression for Jonathan Kuminga, for Moses Moody. Maybe cross your fingers you don't have some of the off-court or actually on-court stuff with Draymond from this like he had last season. But they're still kind of an aging property at key positions, and they're counting on a big bounce-back season from Andrew Wiggins, which I'm not sure you can. What have been your early impressions of the Warriors and kind of their place in the Western Conference?
No, I mean, I think it's one of those, you got to really, really squint to see it, I think, given this roster. I think they're one of a handful of teams that are going to be worth watching really closely in the first couple months because, as you and I both know, there's a lot of GMs, among them at this point. I think the Warriors and Mr. Dunleavy is the idea that I need to see this for 6 weeks, and if we don't like what we see, we're getting off this. You know what I mean? We're going shopping again. We know in the summer they went after Paul George, they go after Lauri Markkanen, didn't get those done, but it certainly informed, kind of what we know about the way they're thinking. So that MO, that plan B is going to be there the entire time because they know that you shouldn't have to squint this hard to see something really, really good. Now, having covered the Olympics and seen Steph at his finest in Paris, you know the motivation there, where it's okay, check that box. This dude is still special. He is still worth building around. But say what you will of Klay Thompson, going from Klay to Brandon Pajemski, who is a fantastic young player, but who's an imperfect fit and kind of a to-be-determined fit next to Steph Curry. You're talking about a small backcourt. Defensively, that's going to present issues. Good playmaker, incredible rebounder for his size, but not the guy who's immediately getting the job from Steve Kerr. They're still looking at that. They're looking at Melton. They're looking at a lot of different options, even Buddy Hield. So there's just too much uncertainty as you even go through the different lineups to even know. They don't know what they are. They don't know what they have. So they're super interesting. Draymond needs to be at his best. He needs to be on the floor. Like you said, keep out of trouble. He can be defensive all he wants about how last season went, and he has been with some media during the preseason. But, that's an absolute must. But 46 is a fairly generous number, in my opinion, for this group.
Yeah, and I do think Andrew Wiggins in a bounce-back year can make an impact there. And look, he was dealing with a lot of stuff off the court that's been reported on, family stuff he's been dealing with. But look, last year the numbers were what they were. He was more Minnesota Andrew Wiggins than the guy we saw really making an impact on that 2022 finals team. Now, he's been dealing with an illness of some sort that's kept him off the floor for a little bit. But is that something you think the Warriors can realistically count on? Because look, he is only 29 years old. It's not like there isn't more left in him, but he to me is kind of one of those missing links that if he can bounce back to being that player we saw for the first couple of years in Golden State, then that can make a pretty big impact.
I hear you for sure. I think, we can only go off what, anybody has shown us recently. And so at the risk of sounding very pessimistic for the Warriors fans, I don't see it right now. I think in the Bay, the mood for sure is frustration. Everything you highlighted about his personal stuff is fair and needs to be part of the context. But I think even independent of that, there has been frustration with the fans. I think even with the organization to a degree that the guy that helped them during that championship run, now almost 3 years ago, just disappeared. That was his shining moment. That was, for one, it spoke so well of their culture that a guy like Wiggins could come in and be everything he wasn't in Minnesota. I didn't anticipate him losing, that superpower going forward as much as he has. And if I was handicapping it, I don't necessarily see him getting it back.
Do you think there is a move out there for them? I mean, they did go after Paul George. They wanted to do some kind of deal with Golden State. They did go after Lauri Markkanen. I don't blame them, by the way, for not taking the deal that was on the table for Lowry Markkanen. You don't. I don't. I'm not a believer in dealing with Danny Ainge when you're in a position of desperation. I've seen that happen too many times.
A little something about that.
He can smell blood in the water, and
Yeah.
I'm sure Danny smelled some blood in the water with Golden State. I think Dunleavy was smart not to pull the trigger on that specific deal, but it does take Markkanen off the table for the rest of this year. He can't be traded before next season. Like, is there like a difference maker out there? Do you think that could, push them beyond this kind of play-in mix and into that contender status?
Not that I see that's realistic. It's funny because in this media climate where sometimes you could write a story you feel great about, it doesn't get aggregated. You wonder if people read it. Then, and this happened to me about a month ago, I go on Tim Kawakami's podcast and I talk about the fact that the Warriors, are always dreaming of Giannis Antetokounmpo coming their way. Well, yeah, no SH, you know what I mean? Like, of course. So like the thing to your question is, I think some of the targets, I'm sure they have targets that I'm not aware of that are more realistic. But for me, it feels like there's this massive gap between the PGs and the Markkanens to, sure, Giannis, they made a call on LeBron last year that didn't go anywhere. One guy that, and this is pure speculation, when I covered the Olympics, it certainly got the attention of a lot of people that after Team USA wins gold, Steve Kerr just had this hard pivot in his post press conference after the gold medal game where he just bent over backwards to heap all this love and praise onto Devin Booker. So that's the kind of stuff that makes you go, all right, if he's smart, like plant that seed. If Phoenix goes sideways, and that could go for Kevin Durant too. If the Suns fall apart, the Warriors, they're going to be open to any elite player, and every name I just threw at you is one that they would welcome with open arms. But if you go back to that word realistic, that's where, I think those two crowds get separated.
I definitely think the Suns are a team to watch. I talked about Phoenix a little bit on the last episode of the show, and I watched them play the Lakers the other day, and their lineup of Tyus Jones, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and insert center here, whether it's Nurkic or Plumlee, it's not going to stop anybody, Sam. It's not.
Yeah.
They were 13th in defensive efficiency last year. I thought that was a miracle by Frank Vogel getting that team to the upper half of the NBA defensively. This lineup, which is a lot smaller and really good offensively, they're going to be bottom third in the NBA defensively, unless something dramatically changes. I watched Grayson Allen. Grayson Allen's up to like 230 pounds.
Ooh.
Doesn't look like good weight to me. Does it? Like he was a step slow in that exhibition opener. And granted, it was the first exhibition game. A lot can happen, but I thought that was bad weight on Grayson Allen. That's all to say that I do think Phoenix could get off to a rough start, and they could look to make some moves. So, speaking of the GM survey, like the GM said Mike Budenholzer was going to make the biggest impact of new coaches. No, he's not. I'm sorry, but no, he's not. Like, he's got Yusuf Nurkic, who is not his kind of center. He's got a lineup that has a whole bunch of average to below average defenders. Like, I don't see how it works.
Well,
Phoenix.
and to that
really
point, because I agree with everything you said. I didn't know Grayson had kind of ballooned a little bit. That's not great.
He
Kevin
says
Durant,
this is. Of course, he says, Sam, that like as every player says, like this is the weight I want to be in. I feel better when I'm bigger.
Right.
He was a step slow on both ends. Watching.
We both feel that way about ourselves right now too, right, buddy?
Yes, 1,000%.
I would also add to that having talked to the Suns coaching staff last season, Kevin Durant did not get enough credit for the defense that he played for most of the season. They relied on him in an incredible way, and he's not getting any younger. Again, just saw him in the Olympics. I wouldn't blame him for changing his mentality a little bit this year, and like he's got to preserve. He's got to be ready for the playoffs. That does not bode well for that regular season defense.
No, and Nurkic, mark my words, is going to drive Budenholzer crazy.
Sure.
He's going to. It's just not. He's dealt with Al Horford, versatile defensive three-point shooter, Brook Lopez, high-level defender, three-point shooter. Now he gets Nurkic, who can rebound a little bit, play make, but doesn't defend at a high level, and so far is not a three-point shooter. So that's going to be an interesting team to watch on the trade market. All right, let's talk about Sacramento, because they made a fascinating offseason decision. Like, they went all in, and they decided DeMar DeRozan was their guy, which was a really weird signing. It really was, because Sacramento is like this race car, and they went out and signed the basketball equivalent of a pickup truck, right? Like, they play up tempo. They like to run. De'Aaron Fox, as fast as any point guard in the NBA. that lineup, bunch of three-point shooters, and you go out and get DeMar DeRozan, who is still a really good player, but is someone that is best equipped for a half-court centric offense. Now, I get it. Like, when you have to play half-court, he's going to be an asset. My question is, like, do you have to play differently when he's out there on the floor? Like, what was your reaction to that specific signing? And, what have you seen so far with that mix and how DeRozan's going to fit in?
First of all, admittedly, you're testing me. I'm trying to pull up the pace numbers from last year to see exactly where the Kings wound up. So hopefully I can get it.
They were up there though. Like, I mean, Fox is a human.
I just wonder
pistol.
if
like
perception meets reality anymore. Because yeah, he's a speed racer, but the Sabonis approach is very half court heavy. With him as the hub, obviously. So in the half court, I like the idea that there are not a lot of teams that can actually come at you with three playmakers, because DeMar in his time in San Antonio became a much better passer than he had been in Toronto. I don't think we highlight that enough. I also think his addition, I don't know what the impact is going to be on the record, on the Vegas line, on whether or not they can get, above their projections. But in a more nuanced cultural sense, I will say it was a pretty significant moment for a franchise that obviously has a hard time attracting free agents. Mm-hmm. It's far and away the most high-profile, most accomplished free agent in the history of the franchise. It's not even close. Vlade Divac would be number 2. We know the story there. That one, again, that was just a perfect piece to add to Chris Webber and Mike Bibby in that group, so that's a different type of pickup. DeMar, I keep dropping this stat because it blows me away. There's all kinds of stuff you can talk about. He hasn't fit with today's game. He obviously is reluctant to shoot the three, all these things. If he, Chris, and this probably won't happen, but if he scores in his next 3 seasons at a similar rate that he did in the previous 3 seasons in Chicago, I was crunching the numbers and the math the other day, he would be on the verge of top 10 all time in scoring. So all of which is to say, like, for the Sacramento Kings that again, typically have to build from the inside out, this was a no-brainer for them. You add into that the fact that Domantas Sabonis is known to be ecstatic about the addition. De'Aaron Fox had a lot to do with the recruitment. So when you talk about keeping your current stars happy, making them feel like they are relevant, you have, cultural value that comes with that. Then it comes down to the basketball. Mike Brown knows that, he made chicken soup out of chicken. You know what? Last year on the defensive side, they got a little bit better, and DeMar is not, he's not a plus defender. So now it's another guy that you have to be creative with. Keon Ellis is going to be a guy that you're going to see a lot more of this year. Mike's trying to figure out what to do at the 2 spot because Kevin Huerter's not ready. Obviously, at the start of the season, he's hurt. But I think even if Kevin was healthy, I wonder if Mike would be going with Keon Ellis, because I've heard this parallel, and I'll bring in Malik Monk to this discussion too. They re-signed Malik in the offseason. Malik is fairly outspoken about wanting to start, and I kind of respect. Again, I keep using the word culture. From a culture standpoint, the Kings' ability to like get a guy to resign, even though like he went in knowing he's not going to get what he wants, he's not going to start. Mike's challenge is using a guy like Keon Ellis, who I've kind of heard him compared to. This is a hell of a comparison. If you go to the old Spurs days and you ask yourself, like, who's the better player in a vacuum, Bruce Bowen or Manu Ginobili, obviously you're going Manu. But for those Spurs teams, Bruce was a better fit. They had to have a defender at that spot. So Keon is a bit of an X factor with this group that is otherwise offense heavy. We'll see how it looks. It is different. It's spicy. It's a little sexy because DeMar is a name, but we'll see how much better they are.
Yeah, and to your point, it is a little more perception than reality, I guess, on how they play. They were 14th in pace last season. That's according to Basketball Reference. 15th when it comes to fast break points. So they're not necessarily the most up-tempo team. It's just they have a really fast point guard that I would think you'd want to surround with guys that play that tempo. I mean, look, they've got some young guys. Like Keegan Murray is a guy I think is I'm going to be watching pretty closely this year. I want to see him able to create more of his own offense. We know he's a good shooter. We know he's a solid overall player, but I think the next step in his game is becoming someone that can take the ball and create his own shot. And I'd like to see more of that from him. But like they're a 46-win team as well, Sam, last year. Do you feel the same way? Do you have to squint to see them get above 46 wins this year?
I don't. I honestly don't as much because even without DeMar, I mean, really, it's almost like if it's going to go down, it'll be because DeMar is a bad fit. Which, not to put it all on him, but basketball's funny that way. Sometimes we think it's going to look one way and it looks another. If you break it down, we know 2 years ago when they were third in the West, I think it was third. It was a little bit of fool's gold because there was so much parity in the West, and in terms of records, it was just not your normal type of season. There are some folks with the Kings who actually feel like they had a better year last year. If you break down, the health comparisons from one year to the next, but it is what it is. They lost in their second play-in game and they missed the playoffs. And for a team that hadn't been there for so long before breaking the streak 2 years ago, that was a major letdown. So they actually feel like it's been behind the scenes, forward progress, and they have mostly known commodities, and then it's a matter of DeMar trying to figure out how he fits in.
Yeah, I think 46 to 48 wins is kind of where I'd put them as well. There's like a lot of teams, some really good teams I could see being in the play-in. They will be in the play-in, like good teams in the play-in this year, whether it's the Warriors, the Lakers, the Clippers, we're going to talk about in a minute, or the Kings, right there in that mix. But I'm curious to see how the DeRozan signing kind of how he pans out, how he fits with them, what to do, as you said, defensively, how if he can play in kind of any kind of up-tempo offense. I think that'll be interesting to watch. Last thing I want to hit you on is the LA Clippers. And you mentioned to me before we started recording, you were at the Clippers Media Day. I'm curious, when Lawrence Frank and others sort of insinuated that they were optimistic that Kawhi Leonard's going to be healthy this season, like, did you laugh? Like, did you laugh on the inside? It's like, I was blown away when I started reading some of those early training camp, early presser quotes, because Kawhi Leonard ended the season with a bad knee. He didn't participate with USA Basketball because he had a bad knee. He's not playing in games in training camp because of bad knee. He has had a bad knee for the better part of the last 5 years. And yet we're supposed to believe that there's reason for optimism that Kawhi Leonard is going to have a healthy year. Like, it boggles my mind, Sam, because at some point you just have to accept the reality that this guy is perpetually hurt when it comes to that knee. And like, the Clippers to me are kind of the basketball embodiment of that meme where they're saying everything's fine, the house is on fire.
Right,
like, Paul
right.
George is gone. Kawhi Leonard is currently hurt. James Harden is 35 years old. They bring in a bunch of guys that can do some of the things that Paul George can do, Derek Jones being chief among them. Like, you talk about squinting to see how the Clippers were a 51 win team last year. They're not going to win 51 games this year.
Right.
They could be the third worst team in the Western Conference this year. I'm going to put Portland at the bottom because I don't think the Blazers care. I think the Jazz at some point may pull the chute on the season because whatever. And then I would put the Clippers right there because I think if Kawhi misses any substantial amount of time, which seems more likely than not, given where we are and what his history is, that this could all come undone. Where do you stand on the Clippers?
Yeah, I mean, listen, in my head, you're the way you laid it out, buddy. You're talking about the idea of the Clippers playing significant time without Kawhi. That puts it on 35-year-old James Harden. We saw that a fair amount last year, and it wasn't really pretty. So I think that is a dicey proposition. I feel for Kawhi. A quick side story: in Team USA training camp in Vegas, we actually had this one day. It was really old school kind of media setting with probably 8 or 9, 10 reporters, small group, in a hotel conference room, one by one, talking to a lot of the guys. Kawhi comes through, and honestly, he was uncomfortable because he's not usually made to do this kind of media. And he pulled the curtain back a little bit more on his experience. And the part where my heart went out to him a little bit was he actually shared how, even with all his injuries, that the silver lining for him is that he's heard from a lot of fans and people, regular folks, who are inspired by the way he fights through all these injuries. It did humanize him to where you really understood that this guy's career, was on track to be one thing, and then obviously has been derailed and is something entirely different. But the track record is what it is. It doesn't bode well for this season. It's strangeness and weirdness all around and all the time when it comes to the way the Clippers handle his information, his prognostication, all those things. So I'm with you. Media day, when they act like there's nothing to see here, it's tough to buy that. And then even, man, I get that every guy in the league is trying to carve out his own space, but did you catch any of Norm Powell's perspective on matters? Did this cross
Little
your
bit.
desk
Why
at
don't
all?
you just recap it for me?
He just is. It's nothing ill-intended. I don't think at all. I actually really enjoyed Norm's outlook in his press conference, but he gets a question of Paul George going to Philly, and the headline that he did explain was he absolutely said that it was addition by subtraction. And he went on to, he was not killing Paul, but he was talking about all these young guys who are going to be hungry and thirsty now to get their shot. And he very openly talked about how he is, viewed himself as a starter going back to his Toronto days. And so like he was hungry for a starting job. The young guys want their piece. It's just not the type of climate that is going to lead to successful, winning basketball with all this uncertainty and potentially guys, treating it like they're just playing for the next contract. And I know the numbers when it comes to bringing Paul George back were, decimating when it comes to, that's why they made the choice. They didn't want to be in the second apron. That's why Paul went to Philly. But you're seeing.
But do you get that? Do you get that, Sam? Like I've talked to a lot of people about this, and yes, that second apron is problematic. We've seen that across the league, teams doing whatever they can to avoid it. But if you're going to pay Kawhi, like if you're all in, and you're going to give James Harden the kind of contract that gave James Harden, aren't you just in? Like, don't you just have to push your chips to the table and say, look, here's the contract you want, Paul. We'll deal with the ramifications afterwards, especially since there's no upside for them to lose. Because the more they lose, the more smiles there are in Oklahoma City. Because they control their draft capital, I think, for the next 3 years, whether it's giving away picks or swaps. Like, I don't get the rationale. Like, to me, the second that they sign Kawhi to that extension, not to relitigate the past here, but the second they sign Kawhi to that extension, they should have given Paul George the exact same thing. Like, once you're all in, aren't you just all in? Like, that part of it, I'll never be able to understand.
I'm with you. I mean, the only counter argument would be, there's all in, and then there's doubling down on being all in. And I'm looking at their cap sheet here, and it sounds like it's a ways out. But if this, let's say they just were not truly convinced that this group, had what it took to be worthy of another 3-4 year run, without Paul, they can get completely past this era of expensive star players who don't play a lot by the summer of 2027. Kawhi goes through that summer. James has a player option for next year. I'm sure he'll pick it up. It's $36 million. But the only argument to counter that would be that the runway is shorter. If you're adding a long-term deal with Paul, then you're pushing it out even more.
Would you have signed Paul George that kind of deal? Like I would have. Like, just again, if you're giving it to Kawhi and again, you have no incentive to tear it all down. Forget about the whole Intuit Dome and having fans there. I think that's secondary to the fact that by losing, you're just giving Oklahoma City your draft capital. Like, I think that is paramount in the thinking of the Clippers. If you,
to answer your question, yes, I think I would have. I mean, Paul is, based on availability, Paul is a better player than Kawhi Leonard at this stage. It's not even close.
Yeah. He was durable last year too. Like, he's had some durability issues during his Clippers tenure, but he was durable last year.
Yeah. So I think I would lean on the yes side.
So where do you slot the Clippers then this year? They're not 51 wins. They're not top 5, I don't think, certainly in the Western Conference. Where do you slot them?
It's just absolutely impossible to handicap because it's the Kawhi. Is Kawhi playing 30 games? Is he playing 60? Is he playing 10? If Kawhi Leonard gives them 65 games, then they're a top 6 team. They're a top 7 team. I will put them there. As you know, there's this group, basically, I've been saying 5 to 12, but that was before the Cat traded. So depending on what you think of Minnesota now, you had OKC, Denver, Minnesota, Dallas as the top 4, and then 5 through 12 was, you hit on it earlier. Like, you could literally have the same team that is capable of being 5th, be out of the playoff picture entirely. And these 3 teams we're talking about here are all in that group. So it's just all about Kawhi, and then obviously James too. What kind of motivation level does he have? It's another one of those prove it years where your legacy has not gotten better the last couple of years. He had another spicy quote coming into the season about how this offense is going to involve a whole lot of him, that is his style.
He is the system.
He is well. He's the system. I did love that. It was pretty savvy flex when he actually shouted out without putting his name on it. He shouted out Luka and talked about how Dallas had just gone on a finals run with a guy who plays the same exact style of basketball that James did during his Houston days. It was almost another endorsement that, I should be the system. And if Kawhi's going to miss, most of the year, maybe he's going to have to be.
But as you know, that Rockets team was specifically built around him and his talent. This Clippers team is not. Like, if you're going to have Zubac out there, Derrick Jones Jr. out there, you're playing him with two non-3-point shooters, that's going to be problematic. To put a button on the Kawhi stuff, like, I'm with you on Kawhi and feeling disappointed for him, right? Like, you go back to the midway point of last season, like, any MVP ballot had Kawhi like the top 3. He was right there. He was having a monster year. The Clippers had a great January. They were taking off. They finally looked like they were getting it all together, and then that knee flares up once again. But man, like, objectively, like, his knee hurt in May. It hurt again in July, and it hurts again right now. Like, you can't look at that and say, hey, that's not a huge, huge problem for this team. By the way, Minnesota, saw them once. Maybe I'm a prisoner of the moment, but I am more bullish on them now than I was like right after the trade. Right after that trade, I was like, oh, lose Cat, Julius, maybe not the right fit. I see DiVincenzo go out there with the starters, knock down 3 threes. I see Naz Reid like looking like he's like, I'm the next Cat, man. He's pulling up for like early threes and looking like a better version of the player that finished last year.
Right.
I don't know how Julius fits in, but I am more optimistic about the Wolves after that trade than I was initially.
Yeah, that's the funny part. Ironically, or maybe just, overlooked wise, I don't know if it matters long-term how well Julius fits in. I think, the fact that his contract is a whole lot shorter than Cat's was obviously a factor. There were economics that were a major driving force in that trade, but Dante being a fantastic player who doesn't get his flowers from the mainstream kind of NBA fan channels. And then the Naz Reid subplot is one that a lot of folks overlooked as well. I mean, this was an absolute endorsement of who Naz is, and they are excited to put him out there in that kind of way. So I hear you. I think they're probably still top 4. Ant, is he had all kinds of love on the GM survey, and with good reason. Can he take that next step? The leadership stuff, I know I keep going back to Team USA, but man, I love some of the stuff that he shared during the national team experience. This one quick anecdote that comes to mind was him talking about how he admitted that during his Minnesota season, typically that when they get behind or they need buckets, that he just gets antsy and he just goes me against the world. And he says, I'm looking up at Team USA and you got Kevin Durant and Steph Curry going swing and finding the better shot. That's the kind of imprint that a young player can have when he plays with guys like this. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Ant be a whole lot better too.
Yeah, on the Randall subject, I agree that maybe it doesn't really matter if he stays long term. I do think they need a third big though, like to be competitive in the conference that can play at a high level. I don't think Luke Garza is that guy. Like I think they need a similar Randall to play at that level, or somebody like Randall to play at that level. I said on the last episode, I'm more of a proponent of bringing Randall off the bench than I am starting him. I'm not sure how well that would go over with Julius Randle in a contract year, but I mean, Naz knows how to play alongside Rudy. I think Randall can play both positions, in spurts. He's more of a power forward, but I think he can play some 5 against the right matchups. If they can convince him to be a 6th man, and maybe they don't want to think that way, but if they can convince him to be a 6th man, I think that is the best rotation for him. Because I think Naz is poised for a big year. Like, man, just watching a little bit of him, man, he just looks so comfortable out there that first game. It's like, oh, all right. I mean, you talk about man of the year last year to the next one.
Style of play, and I got to give a hat tip. I ran into Austin Rivers the other day, and he's doing a podcast over at The Ringer. And I told him, I said, I listened to your pod the other day with Bill Simmons, and they talked about Randall, and Austin really hit on the fact that he's played with Julius, that he was like, hey, listen, fantastic player, all-star player, but he takes a very long time to do what he does. And as far as style, that really jumped out at me because he was detailing that you're talking about dribble, 4, 5, 6 seconds. The stylistic clash that could be there, is worth watching too. And to your point, maybe that's why he would be better coming off the bench if you can convince him to do it.
Yeah, and if he can get that 3-point shot up, those numbers up, that'd be a huge benefit for Minnesota. They need him making like corner threes. He was around 31% last year. He doesn't have to be 41% like he was a few years ago, but if you can get that number up, that'll be effective. Sam, always appreciate it, man. Great stuff. You can check Sam's stuff out over at The Athletic. Keep up the good work, Sam, and I'll see you down the road.
Thank you, brother. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you.